All right, so it's actually week 11, so welcome. Attendance is great. 2 people on the Hangouts. Yeah, so this is the last week. Last week's test didn't go too bad, 73.3 average, 9 people wrote. And now 100%, just 2 people who got 90%. So congratulations to them.
Yay!
So I'll actually get like a Spurs song for the people who get the highest score. Like, I don't know what I've been told. Someone here got 100. Like a Spurs song like that, but for certification training.
Let them get the actual exam.
Yeah. I'll give them virtual. There's a month's supply of BBD water for getting 100%. Prepared water. What BBD should actually get is like prepared Oros. I'd love like prepared Oros. Alright, so I think one thing that I sort of picked up from this weekend's review quiz is that I don't think the questions that were at the bottom 3 questions had a lot to do with EJBs and knowing how EJBs work. So definitely need to sharpen up on that. So the first one, lowest one was question 4, which a third of the people got right. And this is just understanding transactions and how they relate to beans. All methods of a bean must have the same transaction attribute. Now you can have different ones, so you can have one in transaction attributes at class level, and then on every method you can have a different attribute. So you could have a required attribute at your class level, and you can have mandatory on a different one or not supported on another method there. All overloaded methods with the same name of a bean must have the same transaction attribute. I don't know, that doesn't even make sense. So if you're going to inherit a bean, you can always have a different transaction attributes. It doesn't matter. Multiple transaction attributes might be specified for a method, so that's like impossible. How's the container going to know if you specify required and not supported? You know, it's not going to work. So that's definitely not. And then there's no restriction on the transaction attribute value that a bean method may have if it's using container managed. So the only exception is message-driven beans. So your MDBs, they can only have required and not supported, I think. Or supported and not required or something. But they've only got 2. So the correct answer is none of these. So it's one of those, this is one of those questions where I think if you did the EJB certification, it should have been quite easy. Or it doesn't have pulling your face, you didn't do the EJB certification. You haven't written the exam yet. Yeah. You're a loser. Winners write certification exams.
Trying to do a degree.
All right, so question 8 is which one of the following exceptions will thrown by a persistent provider will not cause the active transaction to be marked for rollback? So unfortunately, this is one of those things that you just need to know. There's no shortcut here. You just need to know these. I don't know them. So I'm just going to click on find the correct response. But those are the 3 correct ones. If you actually go and look in the specification, section 3.0 has got the summary of all the exceptions that you need to know about for the exam, and it sort of says which ones roll back, which ones don't roll back, when they get thrown, and what they do, where they inherit from, and so on. So there's not a lot. There's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, like 10, 11 that you need to know for the exam. So I think that's just that you just need to learn. There's no shortcut around that. Then the third one was question 10. And once again, this is one of those EJB questions. So you've got a method that's on a state full session bean, and we're setting the set rollback only. So the thing to remember with EJBs and container managed transactions, or bean managed, you do it for bean managed, you can't do it for bean managed. You can do it for bean managed transactions, it gets called. So if you do a set rollback, what's going to happen is when your transaction manager does its 2-phase commit, it's actually going to somebody's going to say, well, it's been marked for rollback, so it's not. So it's going to somebody's going to say, no, we're not going to commit, and everything's going to re-roll back. So at this stage, it doesn't really roll back. This bean could have been called by another bean, which is being called by another bean, which is called by another method, and all of them could have different transaction attributes or could be bean managed and all that. So set rollback only just says when we get to the transaction manager and we get to our two-phase committing, we're going to vote. I'm going to vote not to commit. So that's what that means. And the only other thing there is that if you don't have an active transaction, it's going to throw the illegal state exception. So the two ones is that the transaction will roll back eventually, and it could throw the illegal state exception. So it doesn't need to be wrapped in a try-catch block. The transaction doesn't get rolled back at the specific line of code, only gets rolled back when the two-phase commit happens, and there's no rolling back or rollback. You can't double roll back. Two rollbacks don't make a commit. That's so bad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that. All right. So this was the last review quiz for this class. So next week we're not doing we're not doing a review quiz. We're doing something much better, and we'll talk about it at the end. Unless you've looked at the training site and you've seen what there is. But then don't put it in the little chat section. Don't spoil the response. I don't think there's any questions. Screen isn't showing. Oh shit. Sorry. I should probably have checked that. Screen share. Say it's like end of the year.
One session, just with Meltz's face. Right time.
Okay.
See, this is what happens when we don't have anyone. You literally broadcast the entire time.
Yeah. Luckily I checked. All right. So you only missed this slide there. So you didn't see this slide? See this slide? Okay. So I spoke about section 3.9. So that's just got all the exceptions there and all that. All right. So last one we're looking at is advanced topics, and I guess it is advanced, but it's also sort of just whatever we haven't done yet in this course. Let's just throw everything into the last week. So it's actually quite a bit to cover, but I guess there won't be a lot of questions about these things. There might be one or two questions about each little subtopic here. So it's about composite keys, primary keys. It's about the attribute overrides, although we've actually looked at these already when you looked at embedded classes. Entity lists and callback methods. And one thing they didn't actually have on you, but they do seem to ask it in the exam, is caching. So I've added that as well. Thank you, CodeRanch. And ETS Viewer, Infoware. All right, so compound primary keys pretty much means that you don't have a single primary key, so you don't just have an ID field. You've actually got two fields or three fields or more that actually make up your primary key. So the idea isn't there to see how many fields you can use. There's no test for that. You have to see, listen, unless you can use 5 fields for the compound, you'll have the most gigantic index ever. So the idea is that you've got more, and this usually falls into when you've got like a one-to-one type relationship or some other relationship you've added. And you need to have, let's say, a department and employee ID linked to a project. So only one, so a project can only belong to one department and one employee at a time, something like that. So there's two ways you can do compound primary keys, and they don't really change the way that the database is structured or the tables, and the one is an ID class and the other one is an embedded ID class. The important things, depending on which one, doesn't matter which one you pick, is that both of them need to implement your serializable interface, and they need to overwrite the equals and hashcode methods, like proper, like the way that they explain in the professional exam certification.
Semi also an
associate. So there's rules around that. And the main thing that happens is because overriding that equals and hashcode is that the provider can then compare primary keys, classes or entities. They're not really entities, but those classes when using something like a find or a which other methods? Find, get, ID, whatever. But wherever you generally put in the primary key, you can then put in an object that represents that primary key or a compound primary key. So the first one you're going to look at is the ID class. The ID class, when you actually set up the class, it's just a normal Bojo, plain old Java object. There's no annotation you need to add to it. It just needs to implement the serializable interface and override the equals and hashcode methods. That's all it needs to do. However, when you want to use that ID class in your entity, you're just going to need to mark your entity and define which class you're using as your ID class. and then the two, whatever fields you've got on your ID class needs to be the same fields on your entity class. So that sounds confusing. So looking at primary keys, looking at the code, so we've got a normal class called employee ID, like we said, implements our serializable interface. It's got two fields, a private string and a country ID, and we've got writing our equals and our hash code methods. So that's it. And then it's also probably best practice not to have setter methods on these things, because you don't want to go and change a primary key afterwards. So you don't do that. It just doesn't work.
In a big corporate, nothing shots.
Yeah. So, and then on your entity, when you want to use this, so you're going to mark on your entity, you're going to say, this is my ID class I'm using. It's the ID class I'm using, and it's pointing to this class. And then on your actual fields, you're going to have the same fields. So I'm going to have my ID and my string. I'm going to mark both as IDs. So that's a class ID. The embeddable one looks a bit nicer, but it depends on how you want to use this, because the only difference, let me finish with embedded ID. So for embedded ID, you're going to use an embeddable class. So that's the only real big difference. Then when you're using it, you don't have to go and specify an ID class. Just in your entity, you're going to specify that specific attribute as an embedded ID. So we're going to look what that looks like. So we've got an embeddable, like a normal embeddable, which is any vowels. Once again, we've got a serializable interface of writing equals and hash code. But when you want to use it, we just say embedded ID, and we use an object there. So you can just use it straight up. So the main difference between the one or the other, and while you use one or the other one, is that with a embedded ID, you can just use employee ID straight. You don't have to go and do anything ID, but if you want to go and look specifically at, let's say, country or the actual ID, you're going to have to say ID.ID or ID.country. So in your JPQL queries or criteria query or something like that, you're going to have an extra dot and an extra name in there. Where with your compound primary keys, you don't have that. You can just go straight employee.ID or employee.string. So that's really the main difference between the two.
What table structure does it create underlying?
Normal compound keys. So we're going to look at a compound key demo. Yay, compound key demo. Is that, so if you're going to look at employee here, so I've got an employee ID field. So we've got this, so we've implemented our serializable. Let me maybe go to presentation mode here. So we've implemented serializable, override equals and hash code. And then on our employee, we've set up the same way. So we've set our class as ID class, employee ID class, and we've got our two fields there. They need to have the same types, and they need to be marked as ID. And they probably need to have at least the same name. I don't think you can have completely different names. I haven't tested them. For your last homework, you can test this. So they need to be the same names as well. And then on department, got department ID, and you have used an embeddable one. Same thing here. Actually, this needs to have the access defined, actually. So if you recall back to week 3 or 4, using an embeddable, because you haven't marked any of the fields or properties with a JPA notation, the provider is supposed to not know which one to use. But I think Hibernate actually just defaults to your fields in any way. But that's not specified. You actually need to go and say which one it needs to use. And then in our department, we're using our embedded ID straight up there. So what that means is, if we go and look at the database structure, which is there, under our employee, you'll get your ID and your street there. And I think if you actually go and look at which one is the properties, that one, you'll see that country and ID are marked as your primary keys for that one. So it just creates normal compound primary key on the table as well. So this uses the class ID, and then our department, it's got the same thing, but there we're using an embeddable. And you can see it does the same country ID, and we've got our primary keys there. So both are going to give you the exact same database structure, or can relate to the same database structure. The main thing is just how many dots you want to use. Embeddable, you're going to have to have one extra dot, an extra attribute in there. So that's really the main difference between them. When I say using it, so if I go something here, so where I do a find employee, so I've got a method here that's called list employee, which I'm going to need to pass an employee ID object into. So you can go and set it up like a normal object, go and create a constructor there for it, the country and the ID, and then when I use it, And as I find employee, I actually just passed employee ID as the primary key in there. Yeah, so it's the that's the easiest way. So I mean, if you had a compound key and you had to have like a perimeter list of every field you need to pass, I think it would have been a bit sucky to use. So it makes compound keys a bit easier to use that way. But in the end, whether this was an embeddable or a class ID, doesn't matter. It's still going to be one entity, one class that you're going to, one object you're going to pass in there. All right, so coming to the attribute override. So we've looked at attribute overrides before. The only thing that really gets added here is the association override. So that's if you actually want to go and override a relationship. So you've got an embedded object, it's got a relationship inside it, and you want to override this relationship to something else, to a different field or a different table than your embeddable normally does. And that's really the main difference. So with an attribute override, you go and override your column. With an associate override, you go and override joint column and joint table. So that's it. Just a refresher on our embeddable. Let me actually just go to our demo because I'm going to show the same thing. So here I've got an address field, which is an embeddable. I've marked the access type because I need to tell it which one to use. I've got a street and a city in there. And then in my employee, I'm using this address field. And you can optionally go and mark it with the embedded annotation. You don't have to. And then it's sort of as a separate object in the end. This sort of comes back to the impediment thingy, where your objects don't necessarily relate exactly to the way your table is set up. So from an object orientation point of view, it makes sense to have an address as a separate entity or a separate class, but in your table it's going to be stupid to have it as a separate table. So this is why you use an embedded object. So we can have it set up like that, or on our department you can also have an address, but on our department, instead of the table having a street and a your employee, but it's just going to be different. So if we can look at the table structure, so you can see under our employee, we've got street and city, and under department, we've got town and road. So it just gives you different column names for the same entity or same object or class. And then this is something new, lifecycle callbacks. So if you did the EJB certifications before, this is sort of the same as the post-construct pre-destroy type callbacks that you can do there. But the main difference is for these lifecycle callbacks is you're not necessarily going to do anything with your entity. So you don't want to, on a post persist or something, go and change the state of your entity, because I don't think it's going to persist. It's already detached, it's done. But what you can maybe do is you might send a message to another system to say this process is done, and it gets done once the specific entity gets persisted.
Like you would do a database trigger, basically.
Yeah, so it's something like that. So you can do a JMS call to somewhere else, or write your log file, or do some update, or
some databases are pure object orientation. There are no way to actually create triggers on a SQL level. So this would in place of normal SQL triggers.
Yeah, so like Rory says, it might be where a database doesn't have like a trigger mechanism, you can maybe use it for that. So this will be whenever an entity gets persisted, updated, removed, or loaded. And there's 7 events. So each of these has got a pre and a post except for load, because load can't have a preload because the update entity doesn't exist yet, so there's nothing to call the callback on. So that's why there's only a post load. It needs to be loaded first before it can be able to callbacks. And all of these sort of fire before or after it. So if you've looked, it probably uses aspects as well. Pretty sure it does. I didn't check it out, but it probably uses aspect and then weave those methods in before and after your actual method that you go and market. So your pre will be called before any of your code gets done, and the post. The main difference between this and like your EJB callbacks is you can't control anything. An EJB callbacks, you can actually throw exceptions and tell it to stop the actual chain of your callbacks being called and do a lot of fancy stuff. Where this is just sort of something happened, you can do something, but you're not really going to control anything there. One of the things to remember is that even though like something like a post update or a post persist, as we call it, doesn't necessarily mean that commit is successful. It just says the post method has been called. So there can still be a rollback. Remember, we've got a two-phase commit there. So somewhere down the line, that might still roll back, even though its post has been called. So these things just say that method has been called. It doesn't mean that method, whatever it's supposed to, was successful. And you can just subscribe to these different callbacks. I have these entity, let me say, lifecycle events via callbacks or entity listeners. So let me get my terminology correct there. The thing is you can only have one. So looking at your lifecycle events, you can only have one callback for a specific event per entity. So you can't have two pre-persist callbacks on an entity, but you can have multiple listeners which add that callback. You could have those callbacks in any of the inherited classes or superclasses for that. So it's just on one specific entity in that class. You can't have more than one method that has the same callback. So actually go and look at these callbacks. The way that you actually register or say I want to take part in this is you actually just go and annotate that specific method that you want to call when any of these lifecycle events happen with the correct annotation. So an add post persist, add post update, add pre remove, whatever you want to do there. And that method signature just needs to be a void, whatever you want to call that method, you can call it whatever you want, and no perimeter. And that's it. So no exceptions, no nothing. You can't have any checked exceptions or stuff like that. It just needs to be a vanilla or raspberry flavored method. I don't know why do you always just get vanilla flavors? You don't ever get anything else? Chocolate, strawberry.
Like a Java. Java is the vanilla. The Ruby.
We should have peanut butter flavor methods. Those will be the peanut butter flavor methods will be the best. So the main things with these was, like I said, you don't want to perform any JPA operations in them. You can of course inherit these entities, inherit each other's callbacks. So if you've got an employee and then you've got a company employee that inherits from employee, it'll inherit that one's callbacks as well. And we look at the order these callbacks get called in as well. So, but it'll call the most general classes callback first. So if you've got an employee and a company employee, it'll call employees callback before it calls company employees callbacks. So it's quite simple and straightforward. Annotated, doesn't return anything, no checked exceptions, no parameters. Boom, ready to go. So you're going to see they probably have questions in the exam where they might have more than one method with the same, subscribing to the same lifecycle event, or the method signature could be wrong. It could be returning something, or it could be taking a specific parameter. So that's the type of stuff to look out for. So an entity listener is, you use entity listeners when you want to have that same sort of code that for your events, but you don't necessarily want to put that inside your entity classes. Or maybe it's sort of common code, something like some more of the logging you're doing. You don't have that code repeated in every single entity. So you can use the entity listener for that. You can also use entity listeners if you want to have sort of some of the default listener you want to have across all your entities. You can do that as well. So it's sort of code once, used many times type thing. Big difference here is that the signature looks a bit different. So because our other callbacks on the entity, it's got access to that entity state. With an event entity listener, it doesn't have access to the state, so it's actually going to pass in that object for you. So it takes a object in there. If you're writing a very general entity listener, you can do an object and just cast it to whatever you need to cast it to. Or if, let's say, you've got an entity listener that's going to listen to all your different employee classes, company, part-time, full-time, and employee, you can actually say this is going to take an employee object and then use that state. So it should be able to cast it, but if you can't cast to it, then you're going to obviously have some errors. So the actual class that you're going to have this in doesn't have to have any annotations, just your normal annotations for the lifecycle event you want to subscribe to. And then on your actual class where you want your entity listener to listen on, you're going to mark that specific class of an entity listeners and then list your entities in there. So that'll look something like this. So you'll have a normal class, nothing funny about it, no serializable interface, no overriding anything, and in that class you'll go and use your different annotations. Same rule applies here as well. You can't have another method for a pre-persist event. And then if you want to actually subscribe to it on your entity, you just go and mark your entity with the add entity listeners annotations, and then go and list the different entity listeners you want on there. The other thing you can also do is you can set up default entity listeners. So let's say you want to add some logging that your provider isn't giving to you. You might go and add that as a default listener. So under your persistent unit defaults, section in your ORM XML, you go and list your entity listeners there and which event you want to listen to. And because this will then go and add that callback or entity event to every single entity in your persistent unit, you can also go and override them. So you can sort of mark your entity with an exclude default listeners annotation, which, as it says, is going to exclude your default listeners. Your entities also inherit your listeners. So if my employee is marked to listen to have an employee debug listener on it, my company employee will also have that on there. If I want to go and say my company employee shouldn't do that, I can say exclude superclass listeners. So that's for default and normal listeners. You can go and override those. So you can really see there's a lot of questions, and they probably have the same type of questions that they had in EJB, is they'll give you something like this where these different events print out something to the console, to the log, and they'll say which order is this going to be printed out. So then you need to know that your pre-persist gets called before your post. And the other thing that we can look at is invocation order. Talking about that is, so you're going to need to know this for those types of questions. Your callbacks get called, events get called before your...
In the study guide, remember the EJB study guide, they had all those pictures where they actually showed the life cycle events.
Yeah, so we have the same life cycle events. So for the entities, I think in the second week maybe, we had the same type of graph as well, which shows when things get loaded, when things get persisted. So you can just see them combining those types of lifecycle events with these lifecycle callbacks and then printing something out to the console or to the log, and you're going to have to say which order it's going to be printed in, or if a specific thing is going to be printed. So the order that's going to be in is whatever the lifecycle order is of entities. Your pre is going to be before your post, and then it's going to be default listeners first, then entity listeners, and that'll be, if there is inheritance there, it'll be from your superclass down to your non-superclass, to your less general, to your more specific, to your more concrete classes. So default entity listeners, then the actual callbacks methods from any inherited class, from superclasses, then down to the actual callback on your own class. So the callback on your own entity class is on the entity class is at bottom of the pile. It's the last one that's going to be called. Top of the pile is default listeners, and they are going to be in the order they are defined in. So if we go and look, if we had entity listeners here and we had another one here, employee debug listener will be called first, and then whatever comes after it will be called second. And the same with entity listeners. So we're going to look at what that looks like. So on my employee class entity, I've got a pre-persist method that's getting called there, and I've also set up a part-time employee little object here, and this is also using the same pre-persist. So following that rules, the employees pre-persist will be called before the part-time employees pre-persist. Because this is a superclass, this is the not-so-superclass. So it's almost like this is Captain America, this is Hawkeye, not so super. He's good with a bow and arrow, but he's not a super. He's not a superclass.
He's underrated, though. Just leave him alone.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Hawkeye. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Hawkeye, I'm just saying he's not Captain America. And then I've also set up a debug listener class, so normal Pojo class, nothing weird here, and I've set up the pre-persist and post-persist little checks. So if my debug listener is set up on my department ID here, you'll see I've got my entity listener set up here. This will be called first before any other callbacks on here as well. And this is to show how to set up a default listener. If I go and look at my ORM little text here, and our persistent metadata, we've got our unit defaults we can set up. And then I've got my entity listener, which points at my debug listener. I'm telling which specific lifecycle event on a default. So this is going to be on every single entity in my persistence unit. And then I can go and override it with the exclude default listeners annotation. So if I go and run this, then we should see our little printout. So you can see our little printouts there. There's the pre-checks before persisting the employee. And we can actually see here there's our default listener doing its thing, our debug one, which is from our entity listener, and then the actual part-time one, which is called second. And then that sort of goes and does the post persist, I think is what I collected to there. So it'll be sort of these types of questions where I'll do these prints and I have to say which one of these things is going to be called in or if they are going to be actually shown. And the last thing is caching. So it's sort of one of those things that I don't have in this topic itself, but there probably will be a question or two about it. So there's some things you just need to know about caching and JPA. First of all, you probably won't necessarily need to ever use caching in your JPA stuff. You'll probably look at different ways of optimizing it at the different levels. Because if you're caching like in your beans, that still needs to cross a layer, so you might want to do some caching higher up in the layers, unless you want to have some shared cache, something like that. But I mean that caching in your JPA layer is probably not your first choice. There's definitely better ways to do your caching. And the only reason you ever want to do caching is for optimization. So there's definitely some other things you can look at before looking at caching at your JPA level.
Presumptuous by saying cache.
Cache.
Yeah, when you like cache.
Yeah, it's not caching cache. The fancy way.
I've heard people say cache.
Have you corrected these people that
No,
say cache?
they were too far gone.
Where their pants too tight and their beards too thick. Did they have man buns? So you can do caching at different levels, your application level, your persistent context, entity manager factory, and JDBC level. So some of these things already do some caching by the software. So your JDBC driver will probably have some caching where it'll short circuit to calling something from the database if it doesn't need to. Your persistent context also has some caching in there, so it sort of doesn't necessarily go back to the driver. At application level, you can do your own caching. So you can actually take that object and store it in a hash map or something like that. So you can do that type of caching. And then your entity manager, you can also do caching. And this is sort of where the exam sort of focuses on, is the entity manager factory caching that you can set up. And this is sort of known as shared cache. This is on your entity manager factory level. So I say most applications shouldn't really be worrying about the caching at that level. And it's manipulated through the Java persistence cache interface. So that interface doesn't do much. It's got it's got a contains method, which sort of says, listen, is this thing in the cache? So you can see, is this entity cached or not? And then there's an evict and evict all offer. So in the evict one has got a few different flavors. One which is you actually say the specific class and the specific object, or you just say specific class, and then evict all is just get everything out of the cache. So one of the use cases that they use this for is if you're writing unit tests and you don't want any funny results because of things being cached. You can actually do an evict all after each unit test. Just make sure that your entity factory isn't caching anything in the background. It's actually doing a call to the database every single time, or whatever you're using as the backing for your tests.
Us JDBC people, and not JDBC, us stream people call it a flush.
A flush.
So this looks like the Victor to flush.
Yeah, it flashes. Well, yeah, it clears your cache. Yeah, it flushes it. So it'll do whatever's then distributed. So for the exam, it does a get cache and contains, sees if something is in there, and then evict and evict all. So I might have a question about, is this thing in the cache or not? If they call it evict or evict all. So I don't think they'll have the most difficult questions around these. Then there's some even more things you can do around the caching, and this is sort of going to almost the entity level. So the one is actually controlling the share cache. So these ones is actually doing stuff on the share cache, seeing if something is in it and getting stuff out of it. And this is actually saying, listen, am I going to use my shared cache or not? So there you can say the default is not specified, which means the provider will decide if it's using it or not. And you can there either say, I want everything to be cached, or I want nothing to be cached. And I don't think you really want to do this. I think falling either way, excuse me, going either way is probably going to hurt your performance. So caching everything might fill up all your memory. Caching nothing will probably hurt your performance. So not specified as default and probably what you want to leave it on. But then you can also, and this is sort of set with a property on your entity manager. So on entity manager, you've got a property called JavaX persistent shared cache mode, and you can sort of set which mode you want on there. With the caching as well, it's not required for providers to actually implement it. They don't have to have caching, but they just have to implement the interfaces for this. So you can go and call these properties and set it. but you have to go and check if your provider actually does anything about it. Then you've got disable selective and enable selective. So the one is it will be your entity will be cached unless you go and say cacheable false, which means it won't cache it. And then enable selective is the opposite. And picking one or the other is just how much typing you want to do. If you've got more that's going to be enabled, then do the disabled one. If you've got more that's going to be disabled, then do the enabled one. Or the other way around. But you understand what I mean. That's sort of depending on how much you want to type. So this one is your just looking at your cache, contains your Victor. The cache configuration sits at your entity manager, and then your dynamic cache management sort of sits at your, you can call it sort of entity level in a way. So if you're doing a query or a refresh or something like that, you can actually tell it for the specific entity or whatever result I'm getting back, whether I'm reading or writing, get it from the cache or don't get it from the cache. So if I'm saying, if I'm doing a read, I can say cache retrieve mode, use them. So actually, if it's in the cache, get it from there. Don't go and do a call to the database. Or bypass is, I don't care if it's in the cache, go and get it from the database each time. So this you can probably use your transactionality type things around there, but this will sort of be, listen, I want to make sure I'm getting it from the database every time. I sort of think if you're going to go down this path of caching, going down a very dark path, and I think you probably, there should be something else you should look at.
You've lost your soul.
Yeah, so, but for the exam you need to know these type of things. If you're doing a write, once again, use says when I'm going to write this thing or persist this data, go and store it in the cache, or bypass, don't store it in the cache, just store it in the database. And there's also a third option, which the read doesn't have, which is called refresh. And that is whenever anything else reads the specific entity again, go and put it in the cache. So no, even I don't care if that thing says bypass it, next time something reads it, put it in the cache. That's pretty much what it means. So I've got a demo here. I'm just going to show you some code. There's not really much around here. Caching. So where did I do this? So
sounds like an American name, like a gangster name. Caching Jackson.
Superior, Cache Jackson. So the first one is on your actual entity manager. You can go and set your shared cache mode, so disable selective, or inactive, or all or none. And on here, like I said, it's disable selective. So on my department, I'm going to say this thing isn't cacheable, so whenever you use department, don't cache it. And then looking at the dynamic cache, I've got it in here when I list my employee. We're going to read it. On the property for my actual find, so I'm setting up some properties, just a map. I've set my property I want to set as my retrieve mode, and I've set it to cache retrieval mode use. So you can also have bypass. So being easier when I do this find, when I'm looking for this specific employee, go and look for it in the cache first. If I don't find it there, it doesn't mean not to return anything, just go and look for it in the cache first. And that's pretty much caching. So I think in the exam I'll probably ask you, will this entity be cached or not? Or if I do this call, will it get it from the cache or not? I really think that's about it. Or it might give you a list of these are the cache retrieve modes, which one isn't a valid cache retrieve mode, that type of things. Okay, so that's the last few topics for this course. Any questions? I think so. Nobody? Okay. I think when David was around, he still asked questions now and again.
David who?
Wilson.
But they were very detailed.
I know.
Very detailed.
Sort of the scary type questions.
Yeah.
All right, so last few minutes, I just want to sort of go over the certification exam and what to expect, what it's all about. Looking at the attendance, I don't know how many people are actually going to go and write this, or going to qualify to write this, but anywho. So this is the exam 898. It says Oracle Certified Expert EE6 Java Persistence API Developer.
We'll put that on the signature. Someone
You put it on your signature, like it'll take up the whole half of your business.
If you're listening, don't put this on your signature.
Take up the bottom part of your business card. Unlike the EJB, you've actually got more than 2 minutes per question on this exam. EJB you had less. So you've got 135 minutes. You've got to do 64 questions, and the passing score is 61%. EJB, I think it's 61 in, or 65 questions or something in 120 minutes, something like that. But I remember it's just a little under 2 minutes. So, and EJB's was 71% pass rate. So this is 61. There's the exam price. So it's what's on that. I don't know what it'll be in India though. No, it won't be in Rand, but I don't know how. But
so BBD actually pays 3,000 Rand. So we think that we're paying 1,690 Rand. But for some reason we get some corporate discount, which actually pushes up to 3,000 Rand.
So we probably got some admin costs we're paying on top of that for them to go and capture it.
Literally. So it's we pay 3,000 Rand for it.
Okay. But anyway, so you can still go and write the exam. They've actually, I think at the moment, I think I saw they've got a 10% discount on it at the moment. Yeah. So I think you can, if you want to be brave,
20% discount for 20 years of Java.
Isn't it 10% discount because we're cheap? Not 20. I think it's 10%.
I'm sure it was 20. That doesn't make sense. If it's 20 years of Java, 20% discount. That was 20.
Oracle doesn't care about Java. They care about making money.
It's going to be 10%. They hold it as like a temptation of Google. You can't get
what marketing was like? No. But anyway, so you can go on there. If you want to go and book the exam yourself, and claim it back when you pass it. So for the preparation, like I said, definitely BBD 2 book, the book we've been going through. If you haven't read any of this yet, go and read it and probably reread it. It's important that you read the specification. A lot of the wording in the certification exam comes out of the specification. So it might be more familiar reading specification, seeing it there. It's not going to tell you anything necessarily more or that's not in the book, but it'll definitely get you into that. So one thing that I sort of found sometimes with certification exams, any type of exams, is sometimes if you read the question, you sometimes pick up that the wording they're using isn't correct. You know, almost like in the answer, or that you say, well, this doesn't sound, so the terminology and stuff. So it might be that. If there's any of those topics, and we'll look at the mock exams now. So looking at the mock exams, definitely to do that. For the Java certification exams, those mock exams are going to help you a lot. First of all, they're going to give you some training in and sort of show you what type of questions are going to be asked. It's also going to show you where you're sort of lacking in knowledge, where you might need to focus on a bit more. And so with that, if there's anything you see, listen, I'm not sure about this, my criteria query, I'm not very clued up on that, or on transactions, or caching, that we just did now. You can go and Google that topic. There'll be somewhere the tutorial or lab or something about it. I promise you'll find something for it. Maybe go through that again. All the classes that we did for this was also on YouTube, so I've put the link there. It's just on my channel, so you can relook at any of those classes, sharing the fun and joy, the laughter. I don't know the jokes aren't funny the first time, so it definitely won't be funny the second time you watch it. And the important thing when you are doing these mock exams is not just seeing which are the correct answers, but understanding why the other answers are wrong. You'll learn more from that than learning why certain answers are correct, learning why the other ones are incorrect. So some things before writing the exam, just from the class point of view, we'll give you an attendance form to sign and return. So that's just for admin and HR and all those types of reasons. So it'll be those attendance quiz questions we're going to use those to sort of say, okay, well, you attended 5 of the classes, or 1, or 10. I wonder if anybody attended all the classes. I don't even think so. I don't think anybody attended all the classes. I'll check that out.
You not.
Well, no, you didn't. So, and then we'll get HR to confirm. I don't know this.
Send out letters that just state, please just sign and confirm that you do that, and it's for regulatory purposes.
Yeah, so you'll get it, sign it, send it back. If anybody qualifies for writing it from a BBD point of view, so you can still go and write it. HR will probably contact you and book an exam time. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. So if you haven't written an Oracle exam before, you're going to need to go and create a Pearson VUE account for Oracle certifications. Just use your BBD email address for that, because otherwise, if you want HR to book it for you, it's
Put the BBD company register. I'll send it to you. I think you've got it, because then it actually links to our company.
Oh, all right, yeah. So I forgot about that. So if you haven't written it before, we'll send out an email. There's a company registration number that they ask for when you do the registration. That's just going to link it to BBD. This is also from BBD because we're a Oracle
Gold Oracle Java SE specialized partner.
Yeah, so because we've got like Oracle cred, to keep Oracle cred, we need to sort of have these certifications linked to BBD. So that's it. When you go and write whichever venue you're going to write at, you're going to need to take 2 photo IDs. Some people are strict about this, some aren't. So you take your driver's license and your ID. That should be sufficient. I went to Bytes, wrote exam again the other day. I do Bytes because I don't like the other place. Because the other place we go to, they don't have you can't register online for them. You have to freaking fax in a paper, fax or email. I'm like 2000 called. They want their fax machine back. Like honestly, I talk IT or something. I don't know if they've changed in the meantime. I'd like no. So I just. But yeah, they're like if you go and write a talk IT, I don't even think they look at your ID. But at Bytes again, got searched with metal detector. I had to lift my pants to show them not hiding any crypt nodes. And they actually checked. You have to have two IDs. They actually checked it. So you need to. You don't want to get to the venue. Only have one, and then have to go back home, race back home, come. So just take 2 IDs. And then whatever works for you. If you want to be there just on time for the exam, chance you might be late. You like that type of adrenaline rush before you write. You know, you want to go and sit down in front of the computer, like sweat dripping, pulse racing. Do that. If you like to be calm when you get there, I think like most people arrive there early. You don't have to take a pen and paper. All of them being Pearson VUE sort of accredited, they'll have something there for you to write on and to write with. Writing the exam, most important thing is 2-minute rule. That's why I sort of spoke about it, and that is, and I think we mentioned in the first class, if you going to look at the question, and as you can see, it's, if you've got just a little bit of more than 2 minutes per question, so you can't take 10 minutes or 5 minutes to answer a question. That's going to screw you over for any other questions. So the main thing there is read the question, 30 seconds, and just go and see, what are they trying to test? Do you understand what they're asking? Have you seen a similar question either previously in the exam or from the InfoWare exams? Do you know what it's about? If you read it and it's like, I've got no idea what they're asking you, or I didn't actually go look at caching. This is a question about caching. I don't know what's happening in caching. So take that 30 seconds to decide, listen, am I going to spend some time on this or not? If you're reading it sort of, I don't know, you're reading like, I know this answer. And so take 30 seconds to decide if you're going to answer this question or not. If you're going to answer it, then go and take like a minute to figure it out. If it starts taking longer than 2 minutes, so you're sitting there, after a while it's like 3 minutes, flag that question and go on to the next one. In the exam, well, they don't say, but each question has the same weight. So whether you answer 10 easy questions or 10 hard questions, it's going to be 10 points. So go and answer the easy ones. One thing I found is don't go through the entire exam and read every question and then start. Don't do that. Sort of start from the first one and answer it. If you're reading it, like this is about caching, I don't know caching, flag it, go on to the next question. I don't think they'll have it in these, but I know of the programmers, they'll have like questions which have got like 5 loops inside and you need to go and try and figure those out. If there's anything that's got a lot of code in there and it's not blatantly obvious what it is there, flag it and go on. It's going to probably take you a while to read that question, go through all the options. So 2-minute rule, take a look, 30 seconds, decide what to do, and go on. Flag it and go on. We want to go back to those. And I found with the Oracle exams I've written, I've never really finished one like an hour before the time, or half an hour before. Most of these, you sort of go down to maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes left. I think the rest exam, I pretty much had like 2 minutes left when I finished. And that's reviewing it as well. So remember, you're going to have to write this, 2 minutes per question, you're going to have to write this, and you probably want some time to just review your answers. So don't spend a lot of time on a question. If you don't know the answer, leave it, go on to the next one. Then the last thing, sort of looking at CodeRanch and some of the feedback from there on the JPA exam. One of the things, so going through that, so the criteria API and transactions, there seems to be a lot of questions that not necessarily about those, but involve those two topics. So know it, understand it, how it works, and especially with transactions, looking at EJBs and how they work in EJBs. It's actually quite simple. You just need to know it. Just don't glance over it. Go and actually study the way the transactions work. And last week's class, there's a link for how that works from a class from the EJB certification classes. Go look at that. They also say the Infoway questions is very similar to the questions in exam. Not the same questions, not the same wording, the same style, same type level, same type of questions. So if you doing those Infoway exam questions, once again, you're going to understand why things are wrong and why things are right. Don't just see, okay, well, I got 5. Go through the things, see why I've got it wrong, why I've got it right, and actually go to the Infoway stuff and just sort of show you what works best there. Also saw that they say the exam is sort of structured the same way the EJBs are, so they don't mix up the topics. They actually go ask the questions from the one topic, then go to the next topic, ask those questions. So they're not going to say in the exam with asking questions about this specific topic, but you'll sort of pick up, well, now it's all the entity manager questions, now it's all the collection and enum questions, now it's all the transaction questions.
There's some adaptation that if it feels that you either don't know or do know a topic, it may ask you more out of the pool. Or
I don't know if it's that adaptive. I haven't. It's
not adaptive as in like it'll fail you on the spot though, but it.
No, I don't know if they ask more employees questions about the topics ask. They might go 1 or 2, but they still need to spread the actual certification across. So I might have 1 extra question, maybe. But I mean, like if they say you don't know caching, I'm not going to ask you 10 caching questions. Because
this is our.
No, I haven't picked that up in any of the exams. So just looking at. All right, so that I mixed up. So and also the questions seem to be more about the application. So it's not going to. There seem to be a lot of questions around, like the one we had in the review from last week. Sort of which one of these exceptions won't roll back the transaction. But actually, they won't ask you straightforward a question like that. They might ask you a question where they've got an exception in the code, and they'll ask if it's going to be rolled back or not. Or they might have an exception that says this line going to be printed out or not. Or when is this set rollback going to do anything or not? So it's sort of it's a lot more applying that theory than actual just straightforward theory questions. And you need to be familiar with EJBs. I say especially around the difference between stateful and stateless beans and the transactions and container managed and bean managed transactions. And as we've been going through this course, I've actually mentioned a few of them. I sort of said, look out for this, look out for that. That's my laptop not charging. So I just noticed my battery is draining. So you definitely need to be familiar. If you haven't worked with EJBs before, you've got no idea what they're about, give us a shot. There's a bunch of YouTube videos for that.
Well done YouTube videos.
So there's a bunch of YouTube videos for EJBs. We've got like 3 different books we use for that, 2 different study guides. So there's a lot of details and learning material for that. But I said they're not going to go into details about EJBs, but you're definitely going to need to know about them and how they work. So, as I alluded to in the beginning of the class, there isn't a review quiz, but we're going to do a mock exam. Not for this weekend, but for the last sort of review one. So instead of having a review quiz on Moodle, we're going to do the test 1 under the standard test on our ETS viewer. Go and show you how to do that. So the idea is that you do this test, you have to pass it. So the passing mark, as I said here, is 61%. So 61% or more is all you need to get.
It will tell you whether you pass or fail.
Yeah, it'll tell you if you passed or not. But for us, you'll need to do that. So if you go to your ETS viewer, you'll see we've got standard test there, and there's a test 1. So we wanted you to do this test. So it's 64 questions, and you actually also see that you've got 134 minutes. So it's the exact same say, conditions, situation as in the exam. So you're just going to start this, fill in all your things, blah, blah, blah. When you're done, you say evaluate test. It's going to tell you, yeah, you've done it or not. And then this little top bit here is going to tell you what happened. So we want a screenshot of this top bit here. But you failed or made it and not, and they're seeing that this is test one and all that type of things. It doesn't actually say which one it is. But anyway, so just showing you, so this is what we want, screenshot of this little bit to show you've passed it or not. When using this information stuff, they've got some nice features here. So when you're doing the studying for the certification, after you've finished a specific test, it actually gives you a breakdown of all the different topics that you need to know for the exam and how you've done in them. So you can sort of see if you've got less than 70% for one of these, you probably want to focus on it, but you want to get as high as possible. And you can also sort of see the breakdown of questions that they've got here. So under implementing transactions and locking, you can see there's 16 questions of the 64 came out of transactions. And Java persistence and API container, one question from that. Querying, 2 questions. Enums, 2 questions. So the top ones here is Java persistence API query language, advanced Java persistence API concepts. I think it's just more questions now in there because they've got covering so many compounds and caching and attributes.
Because I think it starts to get more difficult as it progresses.
They've usually generally split it out, but they it sort of also it could be a bit worse. We're actually going to see average scores. So you can see that the idea is that per test you want to get better. So the average score for test 1 from the community is 71, and 1,140 people have submitted this. So you can see the average is 73%, and then for the real exam, the average real exam score is 87%. So it's, I don't know from how many users are. So after you've written this, you can actually go and update your score on ETS.
This is on YouTube, hey?
The other thing you also do is they've got this overall progress report at the end here. So for all your tests you've written, how many you've got, and then per topic, how many questions have been asked about that topic, and what your average score is for that. So you can always use this to say, okay, well, what do I still need to look at? What do I still need to try out? They've also got this Lightner mode, which is cool. So if you've done all 4 of these tests and you're sort of feeling okay, this will also show you all these different questions, which level you're at. So unlearned means you actually haven't answered this question correctly ever. Level 1 means you've answered it correctly at least once. Level 2, twice. Level learned means you've answered it correctly 3 times. So if you've done it 3 times, it means that you know this question. The idea is that questions that are at the lower levels, you need to focus on more than questions at the high level. So if you've done your 4 tests, any questions that are unlearned means that you actually haven't answered this correctly ever once.
But I'm sure it's good time.
Donald, take it down. All right, so that's sort of how you use that. And then I've sort of got the study view where you can also go and see missed questions, any questions you haven't answered correctly. You can go and set up your own little test. So they've got this easy, tough, and very tough questions as well, which is at specific levels. So you can test yourself on those as well. But I say sort of go through the book, read the spec again, and start doing your standard test. And from here, go and see, listen here, which on my progress report, which topics am I weak in, and start focusing on them, going and either rereading that bit in the book or doing something around it. But anyway, so that's it. So start studying, do the test. For this, you don't have to do it before the weekend. It's actually set up.
Especially for the beer fest is Friday.
It's beer fest and it's end of the year, so you've got until the 13th of December. So it's pretty much 2 weekends to do this in, and you can already do it tonight. If you want to do it, it's open from today.
Just tell them that you can cheat. Just to them.
And you can do this more than once. So if you do it the first time, you don't pass it, you can do it again. So.
And go back and see what the question.
Yeah. So it's up to you. If you want to just go and evaluate the question and then just go and fill in all the correct answers, that's fine. But you're cheating yourself and you're cheating in life.
I've worked it out that it's more difficult to do that than to actually answer them. There's 60 questions to kind of keep context. Of that.
So before we get to the end, the keyword for today is advanced. Fill that in.
We'll load the assignment up also. I don't know if you added that.
No, the assignment is there.
Right.
There it is. ETS viewer, standard test number 1. You need to get 61% or more. You need to upload the screenshot of your final mark.
Are we done? I just want to say a big thank you for Tobias for creating possibly the most elaborate freaking course material known to man, and YouTube videos though, and it's been an absolute privilege to kind of be shown down at the level of detail he does it in. And Tobias is actually going to SPG Mobile, so to do some real hardcore Java. Is it Java?
Yeah, it's Java and JavaScript.
Java, full stack JavaScript development. So maybe he can also just do some internal courses there. But thank you very much.
Cool, thanks, man. So everybody's wondering, I need a USB memory stick.
They are commodities.
We're running a bit over time, but just 2 things. Next week, Monday, Joji Jug, end of the year. So at Intellect, so we're doing it, end of year thing, we're going to be coding some bots for the 100K challenge. It's like Space Invaders. Last year we did RoboCode. It's a lot of fun. We do some peer programming. It's very informal. Nobody's going to worry about what your code looks like. This is really not anything. There's not anybody saying who's better. So that's going to be cool. And then next week, Tuesday, is the Geek of 2015 at the Developer User Group. There's more than there's a shitload of prizes there. So they've got a Chromecast. They've got a little like Star Wars little ball robot thingy you can program as a prize there. They've got a lot of spot prizes, stuff like ebooks. It's actually very cool. So if you can make it, it's 4:30 at Microsoft on Tuesday. Monday night, 6 o'clock at Intellect. Going to be writing some bots. So I hope to see you guys there. Anyway, enjoy. Have a nice Christmas. See everybody on Friday. That's in Joburg. Drop the mic and walks away. Cheers.